Trump at his worst. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews up in Boston. This week, President Trump proved he's willing to destroy this country's law enforcement institutions in order to protect himself from justice. Using a conspiracy theory to trash the Justice Department and the FBI, he's attempting to extort information about the investigation of him and his campaign. Wow. I'm joined by David Corn, Washington Bureau Chief for Mother Jones, and an MSNBC political analyst. Heidi Presblett, national political correspondent for NBC News. And Seth Waxman is a former federal prosecutor. David, I think this is a rabbit hole. I think that the Justice Department has been drawn down into the rabbit hole. I don't know why they agreed to this meeting. I don't know why they're even talking about their evidence. The president is the defendant in this case in all effects. Why are they giving his lawyer access to the meeting? Why are they giving his chief of staff access to the meeting? And why are they even meeting with these people? They're investigating them. I've never heard of investigators meeting with the people being investigated to go over their evidence to see if it's okay that they use it. It's extraordinary. David.
Well, it's extraordinary, but it's a continuation of what we've seen for over a year now. First, they said unmasking was the real scandal. No, it wasn't. Then they said Obama bugging Trump was the real scandal. No, it wasn't. Then it was a FISA warrant. Uranium won, and now it's this phony baloney story about a spy on the campaign. This is Donald Trump and all his minions, including people in Congress, Republicans, creating alternative realities. To call them a conspiracy theory is to give them too much credit. Just fake facts to get out there to distract from the core issue. Russia attacked this country, and while Russia was attacking this country during the 2016 campaign, the Trump campaign was sending out positive signals to Russia and was denying to the public that this attack was underway. And every moment they throw up one of these, confusing narratives, it distracts and it keeps us from talking about the real thing itself, and now it's degrading the Justice Department.
Heidi, how do you as a straight reporter keep the focus on reality away from this bogus reality that Trump keeps creating? He, in many ways, is running a fake presidency. This doesn't exist. This whole thing doesn't exist any more than the birther thing existed. It's made up stuff. It's all the stuff that David just mentioned is made up, fabricated, fake, and yet it's covered because the President of the United States deserves daily press coverage. How do you stop covering what is fake itself? Is it possible?
Because no one is stopping it in his own party, Chris, and that is why this continues to happen. And now Rosenstein is doing his level best. He's making a calculation here that he's going to try and, in the end, save this investigation by mollifying this president in terms of even agreeing to this meeting in the first place. But what happened as soon as he agreed to the meeting, Chris, a day later is when the president began this whole Spygate tweeting conspiracy. And so the president, what he's doing is taking any and every advantage when that sliver opens in the door to throw up the fog, like David said. This is round 3. We saw the wiretapping allegations. We saw the unmasking allegations, all of it bogus. And today, now no one coming out of that meeting and saying that there was any credibility to these accusations that there was a spy in his campaign. On the contrary, what was confirmed by James Clapper was that someone, an informant, was needed because of evidence-based investigation showing that there was a need for someone to go into the campaign and find out what the heck was going on with the Russians trying to communicate with the potential future president of the United States.
Again, I go back to the reverse universe where you say, suppose we had an FBI that did not check out evidence that the Russians were messing with our presidential election, including one of the campaigns, that they were taking one of the sides. If they were not doing that, what would we make of the FBI in terms of counterintelligence? Were they doing their job? Of course not. Well, the president continued to purposefully misrepresent the facts on Twitter this morning, falsely saying that the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper, quote, has now admitted that there was spying in my campaign. However, Clapper very clearly said just the opposite on Tuesday. Let's watch him.
Was the FBI spying on Trump's campaign?
No, they were not. They were spying on a term I don't particularly like, but on what the Russians were doing, trying to understand, were the Russians infiltrating, trying to gain access, trying to gain leverage and influence.
So why doesn't he like
what they do?
Seth, what do we do about our judicial system to keep it whole, where you have a president who's been able to push his way into the actual investigation itself, bringing his attorney, private sector attorney, Emmett Flood, into a meeting to sort of make it clear who the boss is, bring his chief of staff into the meeting for the same purpose, all the time demanding what he calls transparency. In other words, he wants to know everything he can about what's coming his way in terms of the investigation so that he can throw it over, pull it apart, pull the plug on it, or what? I've never heard of a situation where the defendant gets to call the shots in the investigation.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely unprecedented, maybe except for the Nixon administration, and we know how that turned out. The idea that a subject gets to send his surrogates into the prosecutor's office, demand to see documents, demand to know the identity of a confidential informant, learn how that confidential informant was run and operated, just doesn't happen. And then you send Mr. Flood, the attorney, to what, wait outside the meeting and shake hands of people walking in saying, hey, let's keep it honest in there, let's keep it transparent. I mean, there's an implicit threat with that. It's kind of Tony Soprano-esque. You know, he works for the boss. He's going to report back to the boss, and what the boss wants is the result that you all know. So let's go in there and make sure the right result comes out, as Trump has said, and what you know he wants. So it's incredibly troubling. And as for the judicial system, we all just have to hope that the wheels of justice will continue to grind the way they're supposed to, and ultimately, you know, whatever the right result will come out. And I'll just make one last comment, is that, you know, unlike business, where sometimes the ends, the capitalization, the winning of a deal is the goal, the Justice Department works differently. It is the process that counts. We used to talk about, when we were prosecutors, it doesn't matter if it's guilt or innocence at the end of the day, as long as the process was followed, and that is the right result. So a not guilty verdict is justice if the process was followed, and that's what we're losing here. We're losing the process.
David, let's get back to something we've been through together this, and that's the ability of a president to create reality, to create something because he is president that people begin to believe must be sort of real. So you had Bush getting us into the war in Iraq based upon whatever, a whole creation of stuff he created, where he never really admitted his own motive, so he came up with a motive for the country, something called WMD, and how they had it, and blah, 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 and there were meetings in Prague, blah, 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 and there was all kinds of stuff, and Cheney lied and all that, and they created a reality. Here's a president who uses words like spy and spygate, and people out there in the talk shows, I just know they're eating it up. They're eating up in the columnists out there on the right. They're buying into a total hallucination, and that scares them. What are we going to do in our democracy as we move forward to prevent presidents from creating something out of nothing just for their political survival?
Trump is doing something new here. You and I have been through a bunch of scandals, whether it was Watergate, Iran-Contra, even the Monica Lewinsky stuff, and the campaign finance scandals of the Clinton years, and of course the WMD stuff. And there never was a dispute over some basic realities. There was a break-in at Watergate. Arms were sold to Iran and money given to the Contras. And people accepted these things once they emerged. People tried to keep them hidden, but once they came out. And then the question was, who knew what, how bad it was there a violation of law? This time around, Donald Trump has, I guess, learned the lesson of marketing that the truth doesn't matter. So he just gets out there and says, there was no attack. You know, it's all a hoax, it's all a witch hunt, and he knows that 30% of his people, the people who he said would stick with him, even if he shot someone on Fifth Avenue, will accept his reality. And I heard, you know, this frustration in Heidi's voice when she spoke a few minutes ago. How do you break through that? How do you have a set of facts that you can talk about and deal with them and have a true national discourse? And Trump is doing everything possible to make sure we can't have an honest debate because he can't survive one.
Well, this morning came after 5 former top intelligence officials expressed concern about how the ongoing investigation is becoming politicized. In a letter to congressional leadership, they wrote that, quote, when congressional oversight is overly partisan or focused on undermining important counterintelligence investigations, we worry about inappropriate political influence on the investigators and the erosion of a bipartisan approach to intelligence and national security. Heidi, back to you. How do we cover? We have people like Paul Ryan, who I always think has been overestimated in his ability and his character. I'm serious about this. Why is he going over this? This is like Boehner before him saying, I don't want to tell people what to think about birtherism. They are so spineless in the Republican Party now. They are robots, puppets for Trump. They will say anything or avoid saying anything against Trump for fear of their base kicking him out.
And of course, this is a big legacy question for Paul Ryan, Chris, because unlike Mitch McConnell, he's got Devin Nunes, and he's not been reining in Devin Nunes. And a lot of this goes back to, in terms of throwing up the smoke and the fog about unmasking and wiretapping, and now this whole meeting that was arranged to Devin Nunes. But to the previous point of why this is different, I want to address that, Chris. What Nixon did not have was a far-right media echo chamber that is allowing this to happen. Chris, I was in the heartland this past week in Cadillac, Michigan, and every place that I walked into had those chyrons up at the bottom of Fox News talking about spies infiltrating the Trump campaign. No matter what they say, 30% of the people are going to believe it. And this is why it's working, Chris, because at the end of the day, no matter what Mueller's recommendations are, it's not up to him to take action. Who's it up to? It's up to Congress. Congress will have to look at those findings and decide whether or not to impeach. You have that question out there still about whether you can indict a sitting president. That leaves it to Congress. So if they can throw up enough of a fog and just exhaust people about what the truth is, they've succeeded, because when those findings come out, 30% at least will not believe them.
Well, the question arises, when is the party of Lincoln going to be represented by someone like Lincoln and loyal to that tradition? Asked whether the meeting today was appropriate, House Speaker Paul Ryan backed the calls to investigate the investigators and defended Trump's actions in the name of transparency. Let's watch.
We know Russia meddled in our election. We know that there was an effort to get to the bottom of that, and we're going to find out how all that took place. A lot of this is classified, so I'm just going to leave it at that. We're going to have more briefings on just this today. You honestly believe that there was spies? I don't know the answer to that question.
Do you think that the president has done any lasting damage to the FBI and DOJ?
No, I do not believe that that is the case. I think, first of all, it's important that we have good, thorough oversight. Good, thorough oversight, accountability, and transparency heals all wounds that are committed by a government.
Seth, sooner or later, I hope this comes to a reckoning. I think most Americans do want it to come to a reckoning over the facts. Somehow, even in the report by Mr. Mueller himself, that would go to the country and perhaps as well to the Congress. Ultimately, perhaps the Congress, if it's a Democratic Congress or a Republican Congress, they're going to have to rule on this. Is there impeachable grounds here, for example? That's a good point. Can you do that where facts themselves are questioned, where one side can say those are facts? As Rudy Giuliani said yesterday, there are different versions of the truth. Well, what does that mean exactly? What do you mean different versions of the truth?
Yeah, I mean, that's very troubling. And what you have to believe is that when the process is carried out, that there will be a fair, open, and honest hearing, whether that's a trial or an impeachment proceeding. And it's my opinion that Trump and his team have the long game in mind, that a sitting president will not be indicted. There are constitutional hurdles for that, and that might be the correct result. So in an impeachment proceeding, there needs to be 2/3 of the Senate to remove a sitting president. And so there needs what all Trump is looking for is 34 Republican senators that, despite what the evidence is, despite how overwhelming it might be, to David's point earlier, is that he could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone, and the people will stand by him. And, if those 34 Republican senators will vote not to remove him in impeachment proceedings, he wins. He may tear the country apart in the process, but that may be his endgame. I think Donald Trump cares about one thing and one thing only, and it's himself. I don't know that he has a perspective on the institution of the presidency.
Okay. I wish some reporters would go out and go door to door on the United States Senate and ask all the senators, if Donald Trump or any president shot someone on Fifth Avenue, point blank in broad daylight, would you vote to remove him from office or not? And I'm telling you, you're going to have a hard time getting dozens of those Republicans to say, even then, would they ever move to take this guy out of office?
No
Because they're all
comment.
scared to death. They're all scared to death.
They would just send their thoughts and prayers, Chris.
Thank you, sir. David Corn, of course, Heidi Prasla, and Seth Waxman. Thank you for all your various contributions to this very weird discussion. Coming up, the other big story of the day.